Michael McGrath. I have 2 minutes for the question. Deputy McGrath.
Thank you very much, Last Cian Corla. I think a number of things need to be said in relation to the deal that has been announced on the promissory note and the replacement of long-term government bonds. At the outset, I think there will be a grave disappointment that the total amount of debt remains unchanged. Given that how policy is evolving in Europe, it won't be long before a system will be in place whereby the cost of future banking crises will be met by a central Eurozone fund. In other words, where all member states in the Eurozone will be contributing, and also where there will be burden sharing. That is the essence of the banking union, and that is coming down the track. And I think we need to acknowledge that. But by converting the promissory note to government bonds, we are now fully accepting that the new regime in Europe will not be retrospectively applied to Ireland, and that is the bottom line. The deal that has been done confirms, in essence, that the entire stock of Anglo-related debt will be borne by this state alone, and I think we should give recognition to that reality. Given the ECB's insistence that this remains Irish debt and needs to be fully borne by the Irish state, then of course the question arises as to what is the best way of paying it. And that is essentially what the government has been seeking to renegotiate over the last number of months. And there is no doubt, Taoiseach, but that the replacement of the promissory note with long-term government bonds with maturities of between 25 and 40 years, it does ease the burden of paying back the money. There is no question about that, and I believe that independent analysis will support that assertion. I think to properly assess the impact, Taoiseach, we do now need the government to publish the full details and to publish an updated economic and fiscal outlook. The last time that was done was with the budget in December. For example, the updated economic outlook needs to show the revised general government debt, the projected deficit, the exchequer balance, the impact of this deal on the budgetary adjustments. That we need those details, and we need them as quickly as possible. And if I can ask you, Taoiseach, how long will the Irish Central Bank now be allowed to hold these long-term government bonds, because that is a key issue at the heart of all of this. As long as the bonds are held by the Irish Central Bank, then of course the true interest rate to the state is reduced, because part of it is going to be circular. But the ECB will want its money back as quickly as possible, and I'm sure will not allow the Irish Central Bank to hold those bonds indefinitely. If you could also comment on the interest rate issue, I assume it is a floating interest rate linked to the ECB refinancing rate, so it is in essence a variable interest rate, the consequences of that. But finally, if I may, Last Cian Corla, when you strip all of this down, the net effect of it really, Taoiseach, is a €1 billion saving on the budget side, and that's €1 billion that you can realise in 1 year on a one-off basis. And the question is, how is the government going to use that? Are you going to use that €1 billion as a cushion to achieve your overall budgetary targets? Are you now going to sit down with the Troika and seek to renegotiate the adjustment path and seek to reduce the budget adjustment that's planned for next year, currently €3.1 billion? I think that is probably the most fundamental question that we would like to have answered. Thank you.
3 minutes,
First of all, I want to acknowledge what Deputy McGrath has said, his acknowledgement that the agreement which has been concluded will ease the burden of payback on the Irish taxpayer, and I thank him for acknowledging that. In respect of the broader issue that he raised, and I think there is probably a bit of confusion about where this fits with the decision that was taken in June to separate bank and sovereign debt and the progress on banking union. We've always said that there were two elements to the bank debt issue. First of all, there was the issue of the promissory note, this €3.1 billion that was required to be paid every year for a period of 10 years to what was, in effect, a dead bank. That is the issue which has been dealt with in this particular agreement which has been concluded with the ECB. The second part of it, which is the issue of the recapitalisation of the pillar banks, that is an issue that will be addressed in the context of the establishment of banking union. As you know, the single supervisory mechanism has to be put in place by 2014 in order for that to happen, and there are issues, including issues relating to definitions of legacy debt and so on, which are currently under discussion. The specific questions which have been asked. The central bank will sell the bonds only where where such a sale is not disruptive to financial stability. There is a schedule of sales which, again, depending if the sale conditions are right, that would be £500 million up to the end of 2014, £500 million then for the succeeding 4 years. £1 billion for the succeeding 5 years, and then £2 billion per annum thereafter. But as I said, such sales are only in circumstances where it's not disruptive to financial stability. The interest rate will be a floating interest rate. We expect it to be 3 to 3.5%. But as you know, yes, this year. Yeah, but as you know, the central bank has an interest rate arrangement which is about 1%, actually slightly less than 1%. The balance will between the 1% and the 3.5% will return to the exchequer in the profits that the profits that the central bank return to the exchequer. The net effect is, as we said, it is a bond for basket of bonds, average duration 34.5 years, £1 billion off the deficit. In terms of deficit reduction target, it's 0.6%, and it is a reduction of £20 billion on our borrowing requirement. We do intend, because I think some deputies asked here last night that we would have an opportunity to have a full debate on this in the House, and it's intended to have that next week, when no doubt you'll be able to pursue those and other details.
1 minute supplementary question.
I would ask you to release the full details as quickly as possible, because really some of the information you have released there are part of the crucial details, the schedule of the disposal of these bonds by the central bank into the markets. That really is at the core of the value of this deal, and we need that information as quickly as possible. My point in relation to the June summit, and I'm fully aware of the negotiations with respect to the ESM and the pillar banks and so forth, was that if that agreement was to be implemented in its truest form, then it would mean that the cost of bailing out our Anglo-Irish Bank and Irish Nationwide would be dealt with retrospectively under the new regime. That is not now going to happen, clearly, and that has been accepted. But if I can bring it back to the core point, Taoiseach, and that is the issue of the €1 billion saving that there is on the budgetary side, and the Taoiseach confirmed that earlier on. What are the government's views now as to how to utilise that? Are you going to use it just as a cushion, as some headroom in your budget numbers to achieve the 3% target as it has been set out? Or are you going to sit down with the Troika and say, look, the Irish people have taken enormous pain over the last number of years, and we want to use this money to reduce the severity of future budgets, and we want to reduce the budget of 2014 well below a €3 billion adjustment? That really is, I think, the key question.
Well, first of all, in respect of the June deal, I think it's important that we don't see the June deal as something that kind of came as a kind of apparition, or as a kind of gift from on high. The June deal happened because we worked for it. We were one of the states, as you know, in the early part of our discussions with European partners. We were, and at a very early stage, one of the few states that were arguing very strongly for a change of European policy in respect of bank debt. And we secured that change of European policy at the June summit. And anybody who recalls, for example, the Stability Treaty referendum, you will no doubt recall it. I remember going out on the steps of government buildings on the day that the result came in, and both the Taoiseach and I said very clearly on that occasion that our next target was to secure an agreement at European level in relation to the separation of bank and sovereign debt, and we did secure that in June, and that in turn has been extremely helpful. So I think it's important that we don't just regard the June deal as something that happened anyway. It happened because we worked for that June deal and we managed to persuade other partners of the value of it. I think in respect of the 1 billion of the deficit, I mean, clearly this deal, this agreement has now been secured. The issue of the framing of the next budget is going to be a matter that will be considered in the course of time by government. I was a little amused, Deputy McGrath. Again, I acknowledge the positive response that you have given, but I was a little amused at you suggesting that maybe we might go and seek further renegotiation with the Troika on the terms of the bailout. Because only 2 years ago, what a short time 2 years is, we were in the middle of the general election 2 years ago, and on the 2nd of February 2011, I have a press release here from Fianna Fáil. It says Fianna Fáil leader Micheál Martin has said that Labour must stop pretending that Ireland can renegotiate the terms of the IMF EU rescue deal. Well, now we know.
Come on, now we'll call Deputy Jerry Adams. Chuck to Jerry Adams.
Will you give us an update on those meeting on the election files?
It's a very good idea.
Gormagat last Concordia. First of all, Thomas, just so that we get a bit of context about all of this. This is a promissory note which was inflicted upon the Irish people by a Fianna Fáil government in order to pay off the private debt of a toxic bank, which is now under criminal investigation. And if you look back on, for example, what you said last June, you said you succeeded in separating sovereign debt from bad bank debt, and that the legacy debt would be dealt with. Now, what you have succeeded in doing and have announced today is that you've turned this 28 billion promissory note into sovereign debt, which could reach up to 60 billion. And you've tied this debt to this generation, to your adult children. If you have adult children maybe starting work until the year 2053, they'll be paying for this for their entire working lives, and their grandchildren will be paying for it. So instead of removing this burden from the shoulders of the Irish people, you've doubled it. And little wonder there's sweetness and light from Fianna Fáil on this issue, given that they created this issue. Every single penny of the debts of Anglo-Irish will be paid by Irish people as part of this deal. And any young people lucky enough to get a job in the economy today is lumbered with this forever, for as long as they are able to work. So do you accept that you have failed to separate bank debt from sovereign debt? Do you accept that under this deal the total cost of bailing out Anglo has now increased? Do you think it's fair that citizens are being asked to pay for this? And would you acknowledge that austerity is going to continue as part of your government's policy?
Well, first of all, the promissory note is in effect sovereign debt, and the state was made responsible for bank debt by a decision that was made by the previous government in 2008, which your party supported. Your spokesperson in the Dáil on that night was Caoimhín Ó Caoláin, and he described what the Fianna Fáil government was doing as a courageous response. Your colleague, who now has a lot to say about it, was then Senator Pearse Doherty, and he said, "I support this because this bill is in the national interest." And he went on to say, he went on to welcome it as a decisive move. So let's be clear. Let's be clear about where you're coming from here. You actually, this is from the Dáil record. This, you can't. There are a lot of things. There are a lot of things. There are a lot of things. There are a lot of things Sinn Féin can censor, but you can't censor the Dáil record. It's here. It's here for all time. and you know, you were an enthusiast. You were an enthusiast, Deputy Adams. Your party was an enthusiast for tying the bank debt to the sovereign in 2008. Now, this government has been working since we came into office to separate that. It's not easy. There are different elements to it. We have secured an agreement at European level on the separation of bank and sovereign debt. We've had to renegotiate the terms of the promissory note. We have succeeded in doing that. I think that there is some difficulty in understanding some of the basics here. If I offer you €1,000, Deputy Adams, and say this €1,000 you have to pay in March, and I offer you another €1,000 and say this €1,000 you have to pay in 34 and a half years' time, which 1,000 are you going to take? By any standards, the agreement that has been secured is to the benefit of the Irish taxpayer, and as Deputy McGrath has acknowledged, it will ease the burden on the taxpayer.
Thank you, Taoiseach. Chuck Jerry Adams, just supplementary.
Well, Mary Lou says he answered none of my questions, but in fairness, Mary Lou, he did. Because implicit in this, he said, implicit in this, he said that this bad debt is sovereign debt. And that's what you said at the beginning. Just for the record, Sinn Féin voted against legislation on the banking guarantee, and you know that. Now,
Please.
now, if you're casting up election promises, and you know one of the most infamous one is it's Frankfurt's way or Labour's way. So it's clearly.
Please.
It clearly is
Deputy Adams.
Frankfurt's way, absolutely. Secondly, I well remember watching on the television Minister Roberts saying, as far as he was concerned, this would not be paid. And of course, it is going to be paid. And I think an indication of the difficulty you're in, you know, the once proud party of Labour, the champions of the working class, is that you're using as if you like, a guarantor of the validity of your position, Fianna Fáil. Imagine, Taoiseach, that you're using Fianna Fáil in some way to vindicate what you're doing. You see, the reason why this should not be paid is because.
Deputy Dowes, please. This is leader's question.
The reason why this should not be paid is because the people cannot afford to pay it. And your little sort of metaphors about if Sinn Féin isn't taking this debt on. You're not taking this debt on. The ordinary person out there, the citizen out there, the people who sent all of us in here, the people who don't even bother voting, the people who are across all parts of this world because they can't get a job here, the 500,000 people on the dole, they are going to be paying this. So it would be far better if you just stood up and told this straight, that what you've done is that you have turned this into sovereign debt, you've pushed it up the pipe, you have passed the burden on to our children and our grandchildren. That would be the honest, straightforward way of dealing with this, as opposed to trying to spin it into something that it's not.
Yeah,
so,
thank you, Deputy. Over time.
Okay, well, Gummalesco, just can he make cash to occur?
Okay.
Okay, so the question at the end of all of this, what will this mean? Take your party. Well, the average person who went out and voted for the Labour Party 2 years ago, what will this mean in their pockets? What will this mean for those people who can't get health services? What will this mean to the young people who are unemployed? Could you tell us that? Will austerity end on the back of this?
Final reply, Taoiseach, on this question.
Well, I think in fairness to Deputy Adams, he has a very difficult job here this afternoon to try and construct some way of finding fault and a flaw in what has been negotiated with the ECB by any standards. And by any standards, an agreement that reduces our borrowing, requirement by 20 billion over the next 10 years is huge. No, I am answering the question because you asked the question. The question is where is the benefit? Where is the benefit to the people? The benefit to the people of this country is that, first of all, the requirement to pay 3.1 billion in cash of their hard-earned money, the taxes that they pay over, the requirement to pay that on the 31st of this year, of March this year, and on the 31st of March every year for the next 8 years, that will be no longer required. That's the first benefit. The second benefit, the second benefit is that the deficit, which is very difficult, is to be reduced by 1 billion, and that will have a tangible benefit in terms of the budgetary decisions that we have to make. And thirdly, it will reduce the debt burden on the Irish people and will help this country to recover. Now, you said, that we have to tell it straight. There is no way of doing some kind of come in with a wand and try and zap it all away and say we're not paying, we don't have to pay. That is just we didn't actually. No. Please. No. I'm glad you made that point because we actually didn't say that at every stage since the beginning. And I want to correct that, and I'm glad you've given me the opportunity of correcting that. From the very beginning of the crisis, from the time of the bank debt, and we were often asked the question, would we default, refuse to pay if we were in government? And we always said, you cannot do that, you have to renegotiate. We committed ourselves from the very beginning, including the time that we were in opposition, that the strategy would have to be a renegotiation strategy. Now, when we committed ourselves to that strategy, and the two parties on this side of the House who are now in government committed ourselves to that strategy at the time of the general election and when the government was formed, there were people, commentators, people who are now on the opposition benches, people who were then in government, who said, you can't do that. That won't succeed. You won't be allowed to do it. I've quoted one political figure who expressed it very clearly. Some of the commentators that I now see writing, saying maybe there's some flaw in this and trying to find some hole in it and so on, were the very people at that time who were saying you couldn't negotiate and that this was fanciful. We did negotiate. We have renegotiated. We have significantly improved the terms of the promissory note. It does not have to be paid every year. It has been converted into a long-term bond. It will reduce our borrowing requirement by 20 billion, and it takes $1 billion or 0.6% off our deficit. And by any standard, that is a good agreement.
Now, Deputy John Halligan.
Thank you, Last McCorley.
Deputy Halligan. 2 minutes.
Taoiseach, when a former Minister of Finance wrote a 30 billion IOU and gave it to Anglo, and in return gave it to the central bank, without the knowledge, the permission of his colleagues, without proper substantial debate in the Dáil, and of course without the consent of the Irish people, which, by the way, may very well have been unconstitutional. We all know the horrific consequences this has had on the Irish people. An insolvent government promised to pay, on behalf of us all, $3 billion a year for 13 years to an insolvent bank. Any part payment has no basis in equity, social justice, and certainly has no basis in morality for the people of Ireland. The moral question is what demonstrates just how much the government cares for the people of this country with the burden that they have been inflicted on by mistakes, by politicians and bankers to the tune of over €9,000 per person. How often has it been said by prominent politicians and economists right across the world that the taxpayer should not have to foot 1 cent of this bill? We have no legal obligation and no legal requirement to pay any of this debt. The country is being torn apart by austerity, Taoiseach. There is widespread social consensus that any payment is unjustified and unjustifiable. And I think that it is fundamentally wrong in this present crisis that we leave it to 166 people to decide the fate of our nation for the next 15, 16 years. My question to you is, we should not underestimate the knowledge that the Irish people have acquired on the issue of promissory notes. Will you give people a say? Nurses, guards, single mothers, unemployed, people who have left the country, and the hundreds and thousands more who are about to leave the country.
Thank you, Deputy.
Will you go to the people, for instance, in a referendum or an election on this issue, on this grave economic crisis, that the vast majority of people in this country are saying not 1 cent of this money should be paid? It's a moral and unjust imposition on the Irish people, on this debt, on the resources of the people, the citizens of this country, and on the future of this country. People need to be given dignity. The best way to give people dignity in this crisis, Taoiseach, is to let them have a say.
Thank you, Deputy.
Isn't that a reasonable request?
I call on the Taoiseach to reply.
Well, you made reference to the last government, Deputy Hannigan, and the difference is this. The last government saddled the Irish people with the debts of the banks. This government is renegotiating the debt burden and easing the debt burden on the Irish people. That's the difference. Now, in terms of going to the people, we went to the people 2 years ago in a general election. We went to the people on a commitment that we would renegotiate the terms of the deal. As I've said previously, there were many people who doubted either that that was possible or indeed that we would succeed. And there have been times, I have to confess, in this House when it seemed to me that there were people who seemed to wish that we wouldn't succeed. We are making progress, and we're making progress along a number of dimensions. First of all, by any standards, what has been agreed today is hugely significant. The toxic bank that has been at the heart of the crisis in this country, Anglo-Irish Bank and the Irish Nationwide in the form of the IBRC, is no more. We've liquidated that. The promissory note that was to be paid, the €3.1 billion that was to be paid every March, and the people at several occasions got up here and asked questions about what would be paid and so on and so forth, that no longer has to be paid. We have now secured an agreement which is very significantly to the benefit of the Irish people. Secondly, we have also succeeded in persuading our European partners to have a fundamental change in relation to banking policy. That fundamental change was reflected in the Council conclusions last June on the separation of bank and sovereign debt, and followed through by the agreement to establish a banking union. Again, there were people who said that that wouldn't happen, that there wouldn't be followed through, that some states might not allow it to happen. The reality is that the legislative measures to put in place the single supervisory mechanism is proceeding as it happens. This country has responsibility at this particular point in time as presidency of the European Council to advance that, and we are doing that. And arising out of that, there is another set of discussions that we have to have about the recapitalisation of the pillar banks, and those discussions will take place in the context of the establishment of the banking union and the possibility that arises from that of the ESM recapitalising Irish banks. And may I say, in passing, that I find it, of course, every individual citizen has a right to go to the courts on any issue, but I find it quite incredible that a member of this House, no less, went to the courts to try to stop the establishment of the European Stability Mechanism, which is the instrument that we are now relying on to see some recapitalisation direct recapitalisation of Irish banks.
Thank you, Taoiseach. Deputy John Hennigan, one further minute.
Taoiseach, would you accept that three-quarters of the electorate are weary following the painful sacrifices of €30 billion being sucked out of the economy? They're weary of retrenchment and misery. There's no promise in this that over the next number of years it's going to get any better. We still have to pay this debt. We still have to pay this debt.
Every penny.
All that will happen is that we stretch it out further onto our children and our children's children. Again, when you were in opposition, when all of this broke some years back, we listened to you painfully on television programmes and radio programmes saying you would not pay this. This was unjust, it was unfair, it was unjustifiable. It was not our debt, we were going to burn the bondholders. The expression came from yourselves, burn the bondholders, not from anybody on this side of the House. It came from your own finance minister on a television programme who said,
Deputies.
The question that has been asked by the Irish people is, and we cannot get a direct answer, the question that has been asked by the Irish people who are still sceptical and who are overburdened with what has been placed upon them is, will you continue to draw out of the Irish economy, out of the resources of the Irish nation, year after year, by still having to pay back this debt? Isn't it a fact that there is no write-down, there's not the semblance of a write-down? And one further quick point. One further quick point. Greece had 2 bailouts and got a 20% write-down on their debt. And the minister said this was not applicable to Ireland, but has not come into the door and explained why it's not applicable to Ireland. Would you please explain that to us?
Please. Thanks, Deputy. Taoiseach, final reply on this.
Well, again, you see, well, let me just correct one thing for a start. I mean, Greece did not get a write-down of sovereign debt. No, it didn't. It didn't get a write-down of sovereign debt. I mean, you know, I think, you know, we should at least have a discussion, a factual discussion here. Now, let me agree with one thing that you've said, Deputy Halligan. Yes, I did say, and said it repeatedly, that what happened in this country was unjust and unfair. And I still believe that, and I still think that. I think the extent to which the Irish people, working people in this country, Irish taxpayers, have been saddled with the burden of the bad policy decisions that were made, the greed that was associated with the property boom, the overlending, the lax regulation, all that went on with that. Yes, please.
I want the Taoiseach to conclude on this.
It was, and it is unjust and unfair. The people who have to pay, who are bearing the burden of this, are people who have lost their jobs, who have had their pay cut, who are finding it harder to pay the mortgage, who are in very difficult circumstances. They're the people who are bearing the burden of this. And our responsibility and our duty as a government, which we took on 2 years ago, is to get us out of that. And there is no point in anybody trying to pretend that there is some kind of an instant abracadabra solution to the economic crisis that this country has had to go through. And what we are doing is working our way through that crisis, improving it. We have to get the deficit down. We've been doing that. We said we would renegotiate the terms of the bailout. We have done that in several respects. We got a reduction in the interest rate. We got an improvement on the terms recently at the Eurozone and ECOFIN meeting. Today's agreement is a significant advance. And I think it needs to be acknowledged as that. I don't want to say it's going to immediately end the crisis. Of course it's not. But it is a significant advance. It is a significant change in the terms of the commitments that Irish taxpayers have had to make in respect of the paying over to Anglo. We should not underestimate the significance of what we have done here over the past 24 hours. We have put an end to Anglo-Irish Bank and Nationwide and the IBRC. We have put an end to the payment of the promissory note that the previous government saddled on the Irish taxpayers of £3.1 billion every March for 10 years. We have exchanged that for a longer-term bond, a maturity of 34 and a half years. That will have the benefit of reducing our borrowing requirement by 20 billion, take $1 billion off the deficit, take 0.6 in terms of the target that we have to meet in getting our deficit down. It's another 0.6 along the way in achieving that. We have another job of work to do now, which the Taoiseach referred to earlier today, which is on the back of the agreement that was made in June and the establishment of the banking union. There's further work to be done in respect of the easement of our bank debt. But of course, that's not the only thing we have to do. We also have to get more confidence into the Irish economy, more investment into the Irish economy in order to create the jobs that are going to bring about recovery. And that is why the work that we have done on our budgets, bringing stability to our financial system, the negotiation of the bank debt arrangements, all of which contribute to stability. You build investment on that and create the jobs that are necessary in order to bring about recovery. It's all tied together. It's not going to happen overnight, but in 2 years we have made far more progress than any of the sceptics and cynics thought we would be able to make this time 2 years ago.
That concludes